Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Linnert.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio. And for those of you on YouTube, yes, once again, I'm in a hotel room because once again, I'm back visiting my daughter. I'm so glad that she's not sick of me, or at least she's not telling me that she's sick of me, but I am visiting my daughter back up in college. And it's just funny because a couple months ago, when I was helping her move in, and I was telling you, Zachary, how it was kind of a strange feeling of feeling very superfluous and unnecessary during the move-in because my daughter just seems really solid in being back, at her second home in college. And so here I am again visiting, and this time, yep, I'm still superfluous and still unnecessary, but
No.
I'm just in a different headspace of really relishing and enjoying seeing my daughter just really so well acclimated. And I'm just in a different headspace of kind of la la land of I'm just going to enjoy. And this is a little bit of me time in terms of, a little bit of rest. I mean, I'm doing, work on the computer, but just a little different pace than when I'm, back at home and with my full-time practice and coaching and all this kind of stuff. So just having a little bit of more mindful time of rest, relaxation, meditation, and just awareness of my life and how grateful I am for my life. And I just really strongly feel that that awareness, that downtime is rejuvenating and refreshing and restorative, and therefore important so that I show up when the grind happens again. As life is cyclical like that, or even, days and weeks are cyclical like that. And I mentioned this just because you and I, in our, pre-game locker room talk, you were talking about how, in contrast to my kind of downtime of a week, you've had quite the whirlwind of a week. And the feeling of you had planned for yourself and had looked forward to a little bit of me time, and you almost felt that the whirlwind of the week, didn't offer that to you. And we talked about a little bit of boundary setting and not taking in all the drama and the storm that swirls around you, to protect within. And that's a part of me time. And I just wanted to bring up the importance in terms of feeling simply enough and groundedness. One does need to center oneself. It's not self-centered. It's centering of oneself by replenishing and restoring and renewing. So I just wanted to kind of empower you, embrace you, send you this virtual hug in terms of the importance and permission of me time. Not only permission, prescription as a doctor. It is very important, self-care to give that health to yourself.
Well, thank you for that, first of all. And the beautiful thing about going back and listening to our episodes and editing them, you along the way have provided such great tips and ways of thinking for me and our listeners of things that we can do in the moment. We can go out, we can get in nature, right? We can actually engage in water. There are these things that we can do kind of in the moment that can help us if we don't have the opportunity to put some time or some distance between maybe the factors that are playing into our emotional states or mindsets, et cetera. So those little prescriptions that you've given us have been helpful. Jumping off of what we were talking about last episode in terms of projecting opinions either on others or people projecting opinions on us, I'm in the place of recognizing that people's energies, they can project their energies on you, and I the ability to see either in the moment or maybe with a little bit of distance how those energies can then infiltrate your own energy if it's in contrast to really where you are emotionally. And I know this is kind of big and top, and I'll be specific in a minute, but you never like, those the image of the individuals with the plates, and they're like all these plates spinning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, often in that graphic we are noticing all of the plates. And why I bring that up now is because I don't ever really look at the person's face, right? And we think of all of these things spinning, all these things going on, but I imagine we would probably learn something about the emotional core of that person and what they're doing and where they are. Why I say that is right now there's a lot of drama in the people and situations in my life around me. There are all these spinning plates. But I myself am kind of like you. I'm feeling actually very calm and centered, and I don't have that kind of emotional energy right now. There are times when that happens for sure, and I recognize that. But even with all the spinning plates around me, I'm that's not how I would describe myself. But it's a very easy uh, uh, it's a very slippery slope for me to then start to assume those energies, assume that those kind of emotional states when somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, I need this right now," and then I get flushed with that. Okay, well, I've got to do it right now, and I'm learning through some of the tips that you shared, and then also the recognition that okay, that's somebody else's need, that's somebody else's space, that's not mine. I can work and get things done in a timely manner, but I don't have to take on their stress. I don't have to take on their energy in the same way that I don't have to give that to somebody else. So that's where I am right now, which is trying to really preserve my own emotional calm, my emotional balance, my own emotional peace, and that centeredness that you mentioned, while also admitting that it's very easy to be influenced by other people's energies. And right now, there are a lot of energies around me.
Yeah, it's so funny because that is something that uh, wasn't formally taught in medical training in the past, but it's definitely something that is more recognized and talked about in medical training now, which is that there's a saying, "Physician, heal thyself." But another corollary to physicians, heal thyself, is that you don't make somebody else less sick by being sick yourself. So you can have empathy, you can provide medical wisdom, but getting engrossed within the whirlwind of the catastrophe,
Mhm.
if it is a catastrophe,
Yep.
even, which we'll talk about, and thus making yourself sick isn't going to make that other person better. So long way to say that taking on their drama isn't necessarily going to lessen their drama. They just have misery loves company, so now they have somebody to commiserate with, but it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily alleviate the issue. I'll also say that for those of us, and I literally mean us, you and I, because we've
Mhm.
talked about it over the years, if uh, ingrained in us is the people pleaser or the I'm only valuable if I'm a helper.
Mhm.
Um, our natural reaction, therefore, is to take on, to help and to even cure and That's our instinctive reaction, almost from within, for self-validation. That, see, I can help, and I am helpful, and I am valuable, and this is why I do it. And um, not only am I a not bad person, but I'm an especially good person because I do this. And when we feel that that's the only place of, or way to get validation and worth, that is a natural knee-jerk reflex to then take on other people's energies and other people's drama. And it doesn't, in not doing so, doesn't make you a less caring person. Again, one can have compassion and empathy, but it doesn't mean you take it on yourself.
You know, it's interesting. I was while you were talking, and particularly the part about, you know, the misery loves company comment. I have recognized that when I ask somebody how their day is, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, it was such a long day, and I this and I had that and I had this," I do find myself being like, "Oh, me too," when that's not actually like how like my day actually went. But I do find that there's that, I want to connect with that other person or validate what I'm hearing, that people pleaser of like, and also the relative discomfort of that I recognize that exists within me, and I'm not sure why, but of like, what would happen if I'm like, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I had a good day, you know, or like, and then that kind of weirdness of like, is it okay to have a different emotional place than somebody else, particularly if they're in more of a stressful place? Like, I immediately take that on and then respond to validate. So I very much understand what you're saying and recognize that I do that like just in real time, and invalidate wherever I was emotionally, or whatever place that I was in, usually at a cost of like, if I was calm or had a great day, or like things were fine, or like, what did you say at the beginning? Did you say la la land, or like in it kind of a happy place? So yeah, it's interesting that is a tendency that I do have, particularly I think as a people pleaser, to jump in and to honor somebody and where they are, by also then making that my reality or my emotional state, which is interesting.
The true connection is, when it's not about you anyway,
Yep.
right? So it's not even that you have to feel badly about, oh, you had a bad day, well, I had a good day. Well, you
Yeah.
can even be so centered that it's not even about me, so I don't even have to comment about my day.
Yeah.
I can just empathize with you and say, oh, I'm so sorry that you had such a bad day, is there anything that I can do? Or, I'm so sorry that you had a bad day, do you want to talk about it, or maybe
Yeah.
you don't want
Yep.
to talk
Yep.
about it?
Yep.
So it can still be about that person, and you can still be compassionate and have empathy, and even be of assistance without being the fixer, without taking everything on. There, in Pulp Fiction, there's what is the name of Keitel's, he's like the fixer, where you know a shitstorm is happening and he always comes in. Oh, he's the cleaner or the fixer. Anyway, we don't have to assume that role. We also don't have to give the finger, give the middle finger and be like, well, that's your problem, not mine. So again, one can show up, and be mindfully present for a person without having to take on their drama, because taking it on isn't necessarily lessening it. And if in some ways actually taking it on and then commiserating actually might perpetuate that storm, or perpetuate that issue, where they live and abide in that feeling and in that perspective, you know uh like, you've heard me say this before, do you want to argue for your limitations, or do you want to celebrate your potential? Do you want to, um make excuses, or do you want to make an action plan? You know what I mean? Like, it's sometimes living in that space and commiserating isn't actually beneficial, because it either remains stagnant or even, um, creates a downward spiral for now two people instead of one.
Well, certainly as an administrator, that was the case, where I would have teachers or staff come to me, and like everything was at, an alert level, code red, we need this now. And I did find myself, responding like, okay, well, we got to get this done. And then my emotional place, or like where I was at, even in trying to get my own things accomplished, now, were usurped because I didn't recognize that I was not protecting that, or giving space to honor where somebody was. Okay, I hear that you need this, or this is stressing you out, or this is something you need, blah, blah, blah. And rather than just recognizing that, I went further and then took it on at the same time. I can imagine maybe as a parent that this probably happens often. I know when I talk with my siblings that have kids, or friends that have kids, so and so forgot homework, or this application is due, or they've got to go to soccer practice, and this one needs food, and like, wherever their children's emotional places are, then the parents also do feel some pull, or some, they're not necessarily the calm in the middle of the storm that they may feel naturally. They are now kind of pulled out into the vortex itself. I imagine for parents, this is a very relatable, probably a daily experience for them. And I mean, I'm sure you can speak to that too.
I mean, and that, absolutely, in terms of parenting, but even, within relationships, whether it's, romantic coupling relationship, or child to parent relationship, this is where we look into, the issues of enabling and codependence, where, one might feel a part of a deeper relationship because you're going through things, together the exact same way, as opposed to actually perhaps, you know, um, recognizing what is my reaction actually doing for the situation? Is it in fact benefiting, or am I actually enabling, self perpetuating, and in some ways, actually, by being the hero or the savior, making myself feel better, right? And that's what
Yeah.
codependence is. Um, uh, the importance of recognizing and centering oneself and showing up mindfully for others, but also recognizing when drama and disaster and catastrophe, if in fact it is disaster catastrophe, takes everybody. And the reason why I keep saying, I've said it earlier in this recording, of like, is it a disaster? Is it a catastrophe? I say that because, and by the way, I say this not because I've been this like lifelong guru, meditative. Oh, I'm Filipina, okay? Like I'm a fiery, feisty Filipina. Things used to really like set me, and still do so. It's not that I'm like cured of it, but I'm definitely, in my older age, um, have gained perspective of what is a real disaster and what is a real catastrophe versus something that really sucks or really hurts, but in the grand scheme of things, one will get through it. And not to be Annie, but yes, the sun will come out tomorrow, and the sun rises in the east and will set in the west, and you can count on that kind of thing. What I mean by that, not only in age, but with my aging and perspective, but also just like as a surgeon, the very nature of our profession is triaging, you know, what needs attention at the time, and what truly is an emergency versus an urgency versus something that needs tending to. That's triaging. And I think that I was asked once that because I'm exposed to death and illness, does that change my perspective? And I will say, as I get older, and thus, I'm 21 years in experience of being a surgeon. Yeah, it does actually give me a lot of perspective in terms of what is a crisis and what is, what feels like a crisis versus what really is a crisis. And so, if we kind of take almost inventory daily of what are priorities and what are values, and therefore what requires attention, that's, I think, how we can keep ourselves centered, to show up not only for others but to show up authentically for oneself. based on and centered on one's priorities and one's values. Or else it can be, what is that saying? There's somebody, I can't remember who it was, whether it was a poem or whatnot, but it was, when you're out in the world, your hand is being grabbed by other people. I need you here. I need you here. And they're grabbing your hand, but you take your hand and you put it on your heart and you say, but I need you here.
That's exactly where I'm at this week. I mean, that captures it perfectly. I mean, the number of people in situations that are grabbing my hand, and I am very acutely aware of like, but where am I at, and how am I taking care of myself and all this? So yes. If I can ask a question, you brought up the delineation between emergency and urgency. I imagine, and we can cut this out if you're like, no, let's not go there. I imagine that there are times where your sense of urgency versus emergency differs than what your patient may feel, and that there's a difference there. What is that like, and where do you go with that?
It's very, very difficult because I want to also validate that to that patient or to that family member, it is their emergency. So it's not to be dismissive of the sensation or of the perspective that it is an emergency to them. That's their perception, and perception to them is reality. To all of us, perception is reality. But that is where wisdom, knowledge, experience, and just a centered sense of knowing, and that is medical knowledge of what truly is an emergency versus what is an urgency, comes into play. Now, when we step outside of medicine, because I imagine these people that are pulling you, in all different places this past week, it's not about medical questions,
right.
But still, the principle applies in that with compassion, what might feel like an emergency to them, you can validate that it might feel like an emergency, but in the grand scheme of things, that has till tomorrow to be fixed, whereas this has an hour to be fixed, kind of thing. And so that's where the more objective perspective can kind of calm down, prioritize, center, and then you can control not just your time and your schedule, but your energies. And that's what allows one to have focus, right? Because focus is, like lasers, right? So laser is focus energy or focus light. So a light bulb is scattered light, and laser is a focused light beam. That's the same thing in life. We can either be scattered or we can be laser-like focused. And by the way, this isn't 100% of the time. I'm not like this 100% of the time. You're not supposed to be like, we're not supposed to be like this. That life is cyclical. But the awareness of when one needs to be laser focused and when one can be a little bit in la la land, and the fact that you in your life and in your day are having different experiences than somebody else. And so what might feel like they need laser focus because of what's going on in their life, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden switches where you focus your life.
It incredibly helpful, because I also think that from that clarity of focus, then I can respond to somebody who is coming at me with an emergency, and I understand it as, an urgency. I can then be clear about what I am capable or not capable of, in a way to honor where they are, but also honor where I'm at. So I, say something like, I did this, the other day. I recognize that you need this by 2:00, let's say. I can't. I cannot get it to you by 2:00. I can get it to you by 4:00, or I can get it to you by 5:00. That is what I can do given the situation and the constraints on my time right now. Before, the people pleaser in me and the person that then would then get caught up in that emotional storm, like, okay, I've got to do it, and and then I would like now elevate where I was at physically, emotionally, as well as then get caught up in like the swirl and the urgency and everything, and then take on somebody's emergency situation when it was urgent for me. And so what I'm just noticing lately is a shift in that focus, that clarity of like, this is what I can and can't do, or this is where I am at, and this is when I can deliver it, then honors me. It gives me space and it gives me room to keep my hand on my heart, as opposed to then allow my hand to be taken and I get pulled in a direction that I don't want to go in. It's hard though. And I will say that I also recognize the inverse when I have an emergency and I'm asking things of others and I want them to be on my timeline. I also recognize that the way that I could project my energy onto them and how I communicate to them and how I'm, potentially like giving them my stress or my sense of an emergency, or that something's at, an elevated place. And then what I believe about them if they don't deliver when I want them to. So it's actually both. And in this place, to your point about recognizing, honoring, and giving them the space to be them, I'm like, okay, but I also do this too to others. What can I give them that might demonstrate that I see them, but also then not give too much of myself that comes at a cost to me?
Also, too, when you mentioned like, okay, well, this person, it was an emergency and they wanted it at 2 o'clock. Well, you could do it, but you can't, you won't be able to get it done until 4 o'clock. This is an opportunity of even reflecting back respectfully and compassionately. Well, why 2 o'clock? Is it's a corollary of my common question of, is it though? Is it
Yeah.
true? Meaning, okay, well, why 2 o'clock? Like what,
Mm-hmm.
is it 2 o'clock because it just feels better to have it at 2 o'clock, or can we objectively say, if the job is well done, 4 o'clock suffices,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that self reflection of that. Is it though? That question of, is it though? Is it really a crisis? Is it really that timeline, or have I chosen and created somewhat of an arbitrary timeline, and there's actually a little bit of wiggle room in that timeline?
Mm-hmm.
And that will, you talked about projecting your stress on others, but it's also an opportunity to check in with yourself. Am I bringing stress about within my own life to myself because of whatever arbitrary expectations, deadlines, and timelines I'm putting on myself? If so, that's where it's time again to take inventory, whether, it's on a daily basis, weekly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis, right? Of what are priorities, what are values, where do I want to focus my energy, where do I want to focus my light, and am I living that hour, that day, that week according to true priorities and values, or arbitrary, scattered, stressful timeline?
Mm-hmm. As you were talking, it made me think of this moment. I love when we're talking, Elizabeth, and suddenly just like a memory just kind of comes back, and it's a memory that you're like, oh, I'm glad that came back to me. So when I was teaching kindergarten, we ended the day with investigation centers, and it's basically structured play. The students would get to choose whether they wanted to go to blocks or dramatic play or Play-Doh, things like that. And I often recognized or saw just how involved in their activities they were, that I knew that I wanted to end the day at like 2 o'clock because I wanted to have a closing circle, and then I wanted ample time for them to get packed up and everything. But often I saw how involved they were in their play, and I didn't want to disrupt it. So I made a choice not to disrupt it. And I crept into the timeline that I knew in my mind would be best for all of us to have a smoother exit out of the day into their afternoon. But it became like 2:05 and like 2:07 just to give them more time. And you can see where this is going. Then it was, okay, now we've got to do a really quick closing circle, and you need to get your stuff packed, and then we got to go. And then now that flow, that playful energy that they were in, now switched into a place of stress, and now became a place of like, we got to do this. And one of my students, after this was happening, was like, why is the end of the day always stressful? And like that, that kind of just like caught me because I realized, oh, the choice that I was making, right, to like put something off, and I don't mean procrastinate, but to like eke something out, then became, a ripple effect into another area. And I realized, no, in order to have what I believe is of value, which is a time to reflect, a time to come back together as a community, and then a smooth way for the day to go for 5 and 6 year olds to have plenty of time to pack up and plenty of time to get in line and then go downstairs to meet their grown-ups, so that whatever they go off into the afternoon, they're in whatever place, what a more centered place to do that, was more valuable than the 3 extra minutes of play, or the 2 extra minutes, or the 7 extra minutes that I was giving. And that choice was a stronger choice for what I believed would be best to set them up. And so that, that student throwing out that question really like sparked that moment of like, oh, no, you're absolutely right. Like, I don't want the end of the day to be stressful. I don't want that energy imposed on 27 kids. I actually wanted to preserve a different way to go about the end of the day. And it was a nice little question that just like brought me back to what we're talking about today, and how as a teacher, I had tremendous choice to be able to give that and preserve that for them.
Based on what you valued and
Yep.
prioritized. I mean, the flip side could have been, you know what, the play is more important, and why am I putting so much emphasis on
Yep.
having circle time? And so, yeah, if the play is going well and we don't have a circle time, then based on that, the fact that I value playtime more than having the circle, great, and that's the decision you make. Or like
Yep.
you did, no, the circle time is very, very important, and I feel that that's the priority and that's the value. So that is what's going to remain sacred. That's where you choose based on values and priorities, and it's taking inventory, and the inventory and your value of it can change, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I believed this when I was 12 years old, so I better believe this now when I'm 52. I mean, life is
Right.
an evolution, right? And just one other point I also want to say in terms of you and I, whether it's ingrained, whether it's our natural, character, I'd like to think it's how God made us. Of course, we are uh, recovering people pleasers, but we're always going to want to be, I think, helpers
Mm-hmm.
and be there for other people, and not be callous, and not be insensitive, and not be selfish. A centered self is not selfish, but
Yep.
I'll digress. We won't go there. But we definitely don't want to be those things. So it's very uncomfortable not to, be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do want to say is one can be helpful to one's ability, but doesn't have to carry throughout the whole journey, be the cure, be the
Mm-hmm.
solution. And I think of this specifically when I was a resident. I was a junior resident, so this was my 3rd year in residency. And my chief resident, Dr. Ray Wolf, who I adored, I remember we were in the trauma hospital, and it was the end of the day, and our trauma hospital rotation is killer because, like, as you can imagine, we're in the trauma hospital. So we were already at the end of the day. We signed off to the residents who were staying on call overnight. So we're ready to walk out of the hospital, and there's a bridge from the hospital to the parking garage. So as we're walking on this bridge, this mother with a toddler was like screaming for help. Where's the emergency room? Help
Mm-hmm.
me, help me, help me. And her son was, I don't know if unconscious, but was definitely limp. And I just remember Ray Wolf, my chief ortho resident, even though we were excited to go home, this is an emergency. This is, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so he
Mm-hmm.
swooped in, didn't even say a word to the mom, the scrub. So it was clear that she was but swooped in, picked up the boy, carried him in both of his arms, and ran with the mother running, behind him. But boy, he can run fast, even though he's carrying this 50-pound kid, and ran the kid to the emergency room, brought him to the emergency room, and said to the triage nurse, go grab,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. So and so, the attending of the ER, and then handed off the boy, told the mom, we're in the ER, he's in good hands, and then left. And I remember that I can still remember that to this day. Like I can close my eyes and I'm there again. And that's a really powerful message that I think we can take with us right now, which is he didn't say, sucks to be you, mom, or I'm off, shift over, or anything like that. That's just not in him. Of course, I mean, he's a physician. Of course, he's a helper. So he did what he could. He showed up, he was present, he did what he could. But I'll also say this, as an orthopedic surgeon, we are a specialty. We take care of only certain things. You don't want an orthopedic surgeon managing your airway. You don't want a surgeon intubating you or managing, your medications. And so he did what he could, helped where he could, but then also realized the journey continues from here. And I am of no help, to be honest. And that's how we can show up for others as well as their storms are swirling. And he didn't get frazzled and he wasn't, like, oh my God. And he showed up, he did what what he needed to do. So he was a part of the situation, but didn't take on, the drama. But boy, was he helpful. He was critical for his part, for his moment, if you will. And that's what we all can do is we can be mindful, we can be helpful, we can, and if sometimes being helpful is just being compassionate and showing up and being present, it doesn't mean that you have to be the solver. And it definitely doesn't mean that you have to take on that same energy.
No, and it captures, I think, everything that we were talking about today. There are I hope there are times when messages come to us at key times, and being able to talk about this with you is really helpful to cement some of the things that I've been thinking and feeling. And I hope that it's transformative for listeners at wherever they are and whatever storms are swirling around them, or maybe they're feeling internally. But the way that you captured that at the end, truly, Elizabeth, was it was so clear and so such a key takeaway. And a little bit of a mic drop moment. So I just want to put that out and just thank you and just invite all of you to go back and re-listen. There were so many really strong things that I know that I'm still giving some mental space to, but also just I am even more at peace right now, oddly enough, after going into this conversation and this topic, and just a renewed sense of assurance of the things that have been happening around me and what I think is right and best for me in all of this, as well as how I can show up for others. So just fully from my heart, thank you so much.
Thank you, love. That's how you can show up as one's best and favorite self for others, is by first filling your cup so that you then easily and naturally overflow to others, as opposed to not filling your cup and now you're totally emptying yourself. Right?
Yep. Okay, listeners, remember, you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are. Period.
Mwah. Go fill your cup, everybody.